And Lisa starts kind of piping in too. And sometimes the directions that Holden was getting from us was not the same. It was kind of conflicting. And we got about halfway home, and he said, man, riding with y'all is like being in the car with those two old guys from the Muppet Show. So I thought, okay, that's great. My son just compared us to Statler and Waldorf. All right, that's good. If you got your Bible, open up to Luke chapter 12. Luke chapter 12. And a couple of weeks ago, we started a series of looking at parables of Jesus in the book of Luke. And we're going to begin in verse 13 of chapter 12. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." And Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" And then he said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you prepared for yourself? And this is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God." Now, when we read this parable, doesn't this kind of resonate with you a little bit? I mean, isn't that what we call, quote unquote, the American dream? That we're going to work and that we're going to get to a point of building wealth, and then we're going to be able to just sit back and eat, drink, and be merry and be on a perpetual vacation. I got to tell you, when I look at that, I go, yeah, what's wrong with that? Jesus rarely ever, if ever, spoke parables without there being some context to it, some reason why he said what he said. And so, what's the context of this parable? What are you seeing? Why did Jesus tell this parable about a rich man? Yeah. Somebody came up to him and essentially said, "We're having an argument over money here. And we want you to settle our argument about money." Money, just like then and now, is, that's weird, sorry. I thought I turned that off. Sorry about that. Let me kill this thing. Okay, sorry. There. Money, then, just like now, is necessary. We are a capitalist society. We are a capitalist culture. Pretty much you have to have money to survive, right? And even back then, I mean, they needed money, they needed wealth, they needed something to exchange for what they needed to live. And so, it doesn't stand to reason that Jesus is saying money's evil or that money's bad, right? I mean, we go into Paul's writings, or is it Paul that said that the root, it's not money that's the root of all evil, but it's the love of money that's the root of all evil. And so it's not money itself, because like I say, money's necessary in our world. And God has worked through rich people to accomplish some pretty amazing things. When we look biblically, we look at people like Abraham. Abraham, the father of the faithful, he was a very wealthy man. We look at Solomon. Now, granted, Solomon had some character flaws that caused him to turn from God at times, but Solomon, through the wealth he amassed, was able to build the temple that was a place that stood as a beacon for people to be drawn to worship God. If you look in Luke chapter 8 and verses 2 and 3, same book we're working out of here, Jesus says that his ministry was supported by wealthy women. There was a group of women who were, out of their own means, supporting Jesus and his disciples to go around and do their ministry. So it's not this idea of money or wealth itself that Jesus is speaking out against. So what is it? What is it? Read. Yeah. It's not this idea of money itself, but maybe the question is, how much is too much? But I think there's even a deeper question than that, than how much is too much. I think the deeper question, and we've got to go back to the context here. The two people who come to Jesus and want him to settle this dispute, by all reckoning, these two guys are both Israelites, okay? And the nation of Israel, their job was to be a light to the other nations. Their job was to show other nations what it means to be in a relationship with God. And so, you've got these two guys who are arguing over money to the point that they've forgotten both who they are and whose they are. In other words, they have put their trust in stuff to take care of them. And that's why the argument's here, right? Because if you don't tell my brother to divide this with me like he's supposed to, how am I going to take care of myself? And that is where Jesus speaks this parable into it. And I can't help but to think that when Jesus began telling this parable, that there weren't echoes of Deuteronomy chapter 8 in his mind. Turn to Deuteronomy 8. Listen to what God says. Now, in the book of Deuteronomy, the Israelites are getting ready to go into the promised land. The book of Deuteronomy is essentially Moses' farewell address to the Israelites because he's not going to get to go into the promised land. And so what he does is he recounts their history and he recounts their relationship with God. And he talks about how that God has protected and taken care of them for these 40 years they've been wandering in the desert. Now listen to this. Be careful to follow every command I'm giving you today so that you may live and increase and may enter and possess the land the Lord promised on oath to your ancestors. Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the wilderness these 40 years to humble you and test you in order to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commandments. Listen to this. He humbled you, causing you to hunger, and then feeding you with manna, which neither you nor your ancestors had known, to teach you that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Now, is there something in that section that's a little bit troubling to you? Is there a phrase or some words in there that you go, wait a minute? He didn't just let them hunger. He caused them to hunger. That's a little bit disturbing, isn't it? That this loving God who is going to take care of them not only allowed them to be hungry, he caused them to be hungry. But he didn't do it vindictively. He didn't do it maliciously in any way. He did it so that they would understand that he is the source of all provision. And then he feeds them to remind them that he's the source of that provision. And think about the manna, the rules that were given with the manna. 40 years they're in this desert, 40 years they are fed every single day But what were the rules with the manna? How much were they supposed to gather? 1 day supply every day except the day before the Sabbath, and on that day you gather 2 days' worth, because that day of worship you're not supposed to work, that day of rest, okay? And clearly the text said some people ignored that. And it's like, okay, we got all this, and God gave us this today, but who knows if we can trust God that this is going to be here tomorrow. So we got to store all this up as fast as we can to make sure we got plenty. And everybody who did that, what happened to the manna the next day? It was rotten. It stunk. It was full of maggots. The idea was to teach them, God gives you your provision. Yes, you work. Yes, you do what God calls you to do. But God's going to be the one who takes care of you ultimately. And look at how he goes on in this context, even expanding this idea beyond just food. In verse 4, your clothes did not wear out, your feet didn't swell during these 40 years. And then he goes on to say, know then in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, so the Lord your God disciplines you. Observe the commands of the Lord your God, walking in obedience to him and revering him. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land with brooks and streams and deep springs gushing out into the valleys and hills, a land with wheat and barley, vines and fig trees, pomegranates, olive oil and honey, a land where bread will not be scarce, and you will lack nothing, a land where the rocks are iron and you can dig copper out of the hills. And when you have eaten and you are satisfied, praise the Lord your God for the good land he's given you. Be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God, failing to observe his commands, his laws, and his decrees that I'm giving you this day. Otherwise, when you eat and are satisfied, when you build fine houses and settle down, and when your herds and flocks grow large, and your silver and gold increase, and all you have is multiplied, then your heart will become proud, and you will forget the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. He led you through the vast and dreadful wilderness, that thirsty and waterless land with its venomous snakes and scorpions. He brought you water out of hard rock. He gave you manna to eat in the wilderness, something your ancestors had never known, to humble and test you so that in the end it might go well with you. You may say to yourself, listen to this, you may say to yourself, my power and strength and the strength of my hand have produced this wealth for me. But remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth and so confirms his covenant, which he swore to your ancestors as it is today. And if you ever forget the Lord your God and follow other gods and worship and bow down to them, I testify against you today that you will surely be destroyed. Like the nations the Lord destroyed before you, so you will be destroyed for not obeying the Lord your God. When Jesus is telling this parable, I think this was in his mind as clear as could be. You're putting your trust in the wrong thing. This isn't just about the question of how much is enough or how much is too much. This is a question of where do you really put your heart to take care of you? Where do you put your trust? Who do you think is going to provide the provisions you need to live day by day? And the interesting thing is, we're no different. We tend to store up for ourselves. And don't misunderstand what I'm saying here. If you've got a nice retirement, that's great. If you've got a good IRA, if you planned well, that's good. I mean, Scripture tells us in Proverbs that it's a wise person who plans for their future. But what we've got to always remember is it doesn't matter how well you plan and what you did, ultimately, God is the one who's providing for you. I don't care how much work you did and how big your accounts are. God's still the one who's providing for you every single day and every single moment, because it takes almost nothing, an instant, for whatever you have to be wiped out. Everybody old enough probably remembers the housing crisis in 2008, when our nation went into a recession. And I don't know if y'all paid attention, but did you notice at Walmart there was a distinct increase in senior citizens working there? They had a hiring boom with senior citizens because this retirement that they had planned for themselves when the stock market got hit and it went down, they were sitting there at 65, 70 years old going, uh-oh, if I live another 10, 20 years, I don't have enough money to make it anymore. And they had to go back to work. Whatever we have, it can be taken away. And so what Jesus is saying is, don't forget who and whose you are. Because when you remember who and whose you are, that's where you put your faith. That's where you put your trust. I shared this with the Bible class a couple of weeks ago, but I want to share it again. A couple of weeks ago, I was filling my car up. And it was 50-something bucks, to fill up a car, just a regular car. And I got into my car and I started grumbling. I can't believe this. I mean, I was angry. I was frustrated. How can this be that whatever administration or government or this, that, or the other, how can they let gas prices get like this, and this is what this is doing to me, and this is hurting me? And I actually caught myself in that moment. And I thought, shut up. Because never one time in my life have I not had a roof over my head. Never one time in my life have I not had food to eat. Never one time in my life have I not actually had gas in my car to get to where I need to go. And I remember catching myself in that moment and thinking, where's my trust? It's anywhere but God. And I've got to get it back to God. I've got to get my trust back to where it's supposed to be. So, God created us for rhythms of work and rest. And God will provide for us as long as we honor Him in that. And again, there's nothing wrong with planning. There's nothing wrong with thinking ahead. But as you plan and as you think ahead, continually think about where's God in that process. I know that I am entirely biased in how I think about this. But my parents worked very, very hard to have money to give away. That's what they wanted. They knew that God was going to take care of them, and so they wanted funds to give away. And my dad actually, before he passed away, he established a foundation that gives money to various Christian missions projects, scholarships, things like that. And it is such a blessing that our family, every year we get to come together and we get to give away tens of thousands of dollars. Because my dad remembered who was providing for and who was taking care of him. So, the thought I want to leave with you tonight is it's not money. Money's just a tool. Money is neither good nor evil. It's just a tool. But how are you using that tool to God's glory, remembering that ultimately He's the one who's providing everything you've got and everything you need? This evening, if we can help you in any way to be in that relationship that you want to be in with God, let us do that as we stand and sing this song.